Good morning, everybody. I'm Margaret Hinkle. I chair the Post Commission. This is our public meeting number 51. I call the meeting to order and we'll begin with a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon.
I am here. Good morning, everyone, and I apologize. I'm in the car, so my screen will be off for the ride.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Keserosian.
Present, good morning.
Commissioner Luma.
Good morning, present.
Commissioner Talley.
Morning, present.
And absent today are two of our commissioners, Commissioner Bluestone and our new commissioner, Commissioner Crispin, are both unable to attend. I think with that, let me ask for a motion to approve the minutes of our May 22nd meeting. Is there such a motion?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Let me ask for a vote then. Commissioner Baker?
I'll abstain.
Abstain in approval of the minutes? I'm sorry.
I wasn't at that meeting, so
Thank you.
okay.
I apologize for not remembering that. Commissioner Calderon.
I approve.
Thank you. Commissioner Hall.
Approved.
Commissioner Keserosian.
Approved.
Commissioner Luma.
Approved.
Commissioner Talley.
Approve.
And I also approve. And with that, I turn to our executive director, Enrique, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, commissioners. Before I get into the presentation of my executive director report, I would like to just say a couple of words about what the chair alluded to. We have a new commissioner, Commissioner Eddie Crispin from the Boston Police Department. He's a superintendent with the professional with the Bureau of Professional Development. He's unfortunately not able to join us today, and we'll be properly introducing him at the next commission meeting. Commissioner Ellison has retired, and Attorney General Campbell has appointed Commissioner Crispin in his place. I see him there, and thank you for joining us, Commissioner Ellison, or I should say now Larry Ellison. We like to just recognize all your contributions. The staff was able to properly also recognize you at the last staff meeting, in which we presented a certificate of appreciation. I just want to say again that personally we really appreciate all of your contributions, your perspective, all the great questions that you asked of the commissioners, of us, that made us think and rethink processes that we thought we had started and need to always fine-tune. As the treasurer, you had additional interactions with myself and with Eric and other staff members in your position of overseeing all of our financial operations, including coming to advocate for our budget with the legislature and the Joint Committee of on Ways and Means. I just want to say, just remember a personal anecdote. I remember when some of us, myself included, attended a ceremony at the Boston Police Department in which Larry obtained the badge #1 because that being then the longest tenure as a police officer in the Boston PD. And the testimony that many people provided really spoke, in my opinion and recollection, as to what a difference you have made throughout your career. It is clear that you've touched the lives of many people, many police officers, and that is really significant, and we remember it fondly. You have also done that here with the Post, and for that, again, Larry, we thank you very much. Let me make a pause there and see if anybody wants to say anything else, because I think it would be appropriate if the chair will accept that.
Thank you, Enrique. Let me could I speak first? Because, and then we'll turn to others who may want to add something. Let me just say a few words to you, please, Larry. By our enabling statute, each of the commissioners brings a unique professional background to our work. Over the last 3 years and our now 50 public meetings, I should say, in my view, Larry Ellison has personified the ideal post commissioner. He prepares very well. He questions adroitly, sensitively, and often. He negotiates wisely, and he always displays care and compassion for the issues and the people that he is dealing with. Larry, you absolutely exemplify the best of Post, and you have served Post and the Commonwealth with distinction. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And I think with that, if I could turn to our secretary next, and well, we'll then move to you, please, Debbie.
Thank you.
Ms. Erosion?
Larry, I just have to tell you how much I've learned from you being on this commission and how in awe I am of you and how much I respect you and everything you do. I can't, you do more behind the wheel of your car than most people do in their office all day. You always know every single case, every issue. You always ask questions that, you know, I wish I had asked, but I'm glad that you did. So you'll be very missed. And I'm gonna take away from this that when there's a tough call, I always say to myself, what would Larry Ellison do? So that's what I'll be doing. And I appreciate everything you've taught me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcia.
Debbie, please.
Larry, I'm a newer commissioner, but I'm so glad I had an opportunity to serve with you on this commission for a short period of time. Your impact has been huge. And I just want to thank you for leading with courage and integrity. And I must say, even in other circles, I mean, everybody knows you, Larry Ellison, and I love to name drop. So I'm like, yeah, we're great friends. So just know that, keep that between us. We're great friends, okay? People ask, like, who's that woman saying that? But thank you so much for your service and modeling behavior for commissioners. Really, I appreciate you.
And thank you very much.
And Commissioner Luma, please.
Larry, I just want to show my appreciation for you. We've had some additional conversations that I've always found really helpful. Thank you for just bringing a different lens and perspective. You are such a strong advocate, particularly for officers, school police officers, and the people that they serve. And so I don't know how much more else I could say, but I know that you will be missed. You're so much appreciated, and we value you so much. So thank you for your service. Thank you for everything that you've done, and thank you for your advocacy.
Thank you, my friend.
And our financial officer, please, Eric.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Larry, you will be missed. It was indeed a true pleasure working with you. You're a true gentleman. Your counsel was always appreciated, and perspective and insight. But
Eric, your volume is a little muted. If you could get closer.
can you hear me now?
Yes.
Slightly better, yeah.
Sorry about that. I wasn't saying anything important. No, kidding. Larry, you were a true gentleman to work with. It was indeed a pleasure. Your perspective and insight was invaluable. I always appreciated your counsel. You also helped the finance and administration group. Sometimes we always wavered from, we got deep into the numbers, but you always pulled us back with common sense. And I do truly appreciate that. I also consider you a friend. So you will be missed, and we'll be getting lunch very soon.
Looking forward to it. Now that we can have lunch.
Thank you. And I think with that,
Yep. I can, thank you, Madam Chair. I can just follow up on my report. As I mentioned, just very briefly, Commissioner Crispin, we look forward to working with him. He will be joining us in our next commission meeting, and we'll make an introduction further at that time. Okay, with that, let me share my screen to get into my report. If you give me just one minute. Can everybody see the PowerPoint? Okay, thank you. I will be providing, touching on the customary topics as part of my executive director report. I'll be describing some of the latest efforts during our certification process, which is actively ongoing. Those are all officers with last names Q through Z. I will provide a brief disciplinary records update, and later on, Eric Rebelo-Pradas will also join me for a couple of slides as part of the presentation in terms of some finance and administrative matters. As I've reported to you in the past couple of commission meetings, commissioners, the deadline for submitting officers with last names Q through Z, active officers who were veteran officers who were granted statutory certification, is very fast approaching. It is really, we're only days from that deadline. Agencies must request an extension before that deadline. I will say that there is only one agency so far that has requested and was granted an extension to the next month. That would be July 30th. That agency is Revere. And there's a few agencies who we are actively contacting who have not submitted nor requested an extension. The certification team is actively contacting those agencies because we don't want them to be out of compliance with that submission. We sent we've been sending wide reminders to all agencies and then targeted reminders. The latest one, written reminders, the latest one on June 7th. But as I mentioned, we are now really calling them up and making sure that they submit or they know that they have to submit the information that's due by June 30th. Given this deadline that is fast approaching, as early as June 30th or right before, we will start publishing the names of agencies who have yet to submit certification information, and we know and I can expect individual officers to be submitted and haven't done so. Let me just give you a quick snapshot of the numbers to date. The Division of Certification processes information in real time. Was there a question? Okay, I was just mentioning that the division, there may be somebody who we need to mute, Jamie. Okay.
Chair Hinkle, if you go on mute.
Is there somebody who's not muted?
You should be good now.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. So as I was saying, we have begun processing those. We've always been processing applications in real time, and we are in a position. The division is in a position to send certification notices as early as July 1, which is really a big improvement from the last two times that we did this certification process. Here are some preliminary figures. This is as of June 18. We are expecting approximately 4,143 individuals to be submitted as part of this submission. And we have north of 50%, 2,315 individuals submitted. That means there's still a lot of individual officers who need to be submitted for recertification. Not every agency will be submitting packets for recertification. I may have mentioned earlier that we have a much better sense of how many and which officers need to be submitted. We cannot just automatically recertify them because we need some information to be submitted and then clarify that that person is still active. But so this time around, we expect approximately 378 agencies out of the 438 to be submitting records for recertification. Commissioners might not remember, but last time I reported this figure, we reported that we were expecting 4,236 officers. And the difference is because as we get closer and closer, we can ascertain and have ascertained that 93 individuals have dropped off from the certification requirement, given that they will not be meeting the requirements of the Bridge Academy, for example, or that they have retired and will not be requesting a certification renewal. There's a number of agencies, by the way, 14, that we predict they only have one officer to submit. These are small agencies, of course. It is possible that some of those agencies will not submit any of those, that officer, if you will, for recertification, because that they may be in the similar category of retiring or dropping off from their ranks. Let me move on to the catch-up project when it comes to the disciplinary records. Commissioners will remember that what we call the catch-up project is for all those records that have been submitted to post after January 31st of last year and before March 5th of this year. That was a period in which we had the cutoff of the historical disciplinary records. A lot of records were still flowing into a general mailbox, and we have pre-populated all of those records into the portal. This has been a very involved process, and we need agencies to come in and update those records and close them out so that we can continue to then start reporting on them. We have reminded agencies multiple times that they are required to come in and properly categorize and close out those complaints. By close out, I mean that they may have submitted, of course, an initial complaint, the way they are required to do within the 2 business days. But there's additional information that flows after that, the results of an internal affairs investigation, and as well as the results of discipline, if any discipline was imposed. Like all of our other processes, in some cases, the Division of Standards has granted some time extensions for good cause. Sometimes the matter may take longer than the 90 days that our regulations provide for, and we, as per the regulations, can also grant those extensions. Where the officer is no longer with the agency, the Division of Standards still needs that information to come from agencies, so that we can make those changes in our portal. So this process is involved. There's a lot of dialogue that needs to happen, but where we don't see that there's either an extension request or a closed out complaint, we have begun to really reach out to individual agencies to make sure that they remember to complete this requirement. I can report as of last Tuesday, we were predicting around 27 agencies that still need to close out previously submitted complaints or reports. As I mentioned earlier, the Division of Standards is reaching out to these agencies individually to ensure that this requirement is met. Still, there are some that are not in compliance and with past due dates without an extension request. And at this point, we are very close to beginning to publish the names of agencies who are not in compliance with this requirement, to ensure that they promptly do so. So another aspect of the disciplinary records that I want to mention, we will, as commissioners might remember, we shoot for monthly updates, typically at the beginning of the month, and we are predicting that for the July 2024 database update, there will be some records that will come off the disciplinary records database. I'm specifically referring to the regulation that's here in the slides, 555 CMR 806 4B13, that states that information relative to an individual who is no longer serving as an officer, who last received a certificate or certification 3 years prior, shall not be included in the public database. The reason being that anybody who drops off, retires in good standing, because the certification is prospective for 3 years, the records remain in these historical disciplinary records until we get confirmation that that person is no longer certified and has not been certified for at least 3 years. So this July 1 of 2024 will be the first instance or the first time in which records under this regulation come off from the database. And that is because on July 1 of 2021, 3 years prior, all active officers at the time were certified by statute. They were granted the certification by the act. And so officers that never have received a certification from post, in other words, they were never submitted to us for certification or as part of our certification process of the last 2-3 years, really, are eligible to come off the database. These individuals don't need to do anything. We are looking at the records to make sure that we have the right records, and therefore we'll update our database accordingly. Records will not be part of the public database, but there's a big important exception, and that is anybody who is decertified or disciplined by the commission. The records will continue to be part of the public database. Another update for our July release will begin to start including what Discipline Post has imposed, notably those individuals who have been decertified. This information, by the way, has been previously available and will continue to be available in the decisions and orders page of our website. And anybody can look up the individual officer and the decision in its written form for all of that background. But we are now including a summary of these cases as part of our disciplinary records history, with an emphasis towards consolidating information in what the statute calls a publicly available and searchable database. And what this has meant behind the scenes is that we have to look at different sources of information and consolidate them in the report. And we feel that this is some of the efforts. This includes additional efforts that we have made with the goal of having one source of information that is publicly available and searchable. I will note here that we are also in the process of procuring something called a business intelligence tool. We've reported to you in the past as part of the budget request that we had for the legislature. And we expect to implement this BI tool in fiscal year 25. This platform will enable users to come into our website and look up people by name or by different criteria, and be able to get information for whichever sources we have to be displayed for their use on the website. This will be an important next project of the technology and the standards teams, and I will be, of course, reporting on that progress as we go along. Let me pause there and see if there's any questions for commissioners, or if we can, from commissioners rather, and about this part of the report. and or keep it over before I turn it over to Eric for the finance update. Seeing none, Eric, do you want to start the update?
Sure,
Finance
absolutely.
update?
If you don't mind, first of all, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Enrique. So just starting out for FY25, quick update. We are now in the conference committee phase of the budget development process. All 6 conference committee members were appointed by June 3rd. So they're now going to negotiate between the higher and the lower number. You may recall that the House had given our appropriation for FY25 $8.75 million, which is what we had testified in favor of. The Senate came down about $90,000 to $8.66 million. Again, this is something they do so that they can have some leverage when they are negotiating in conference committee. Enrique had forwarded letters of support for the higher number over to all 6 of the conference committee members. And we're also going to hedge our bets by requesting a $90,000 PAC from A&F. This is a carry forward of unspent funds from FY24 into FY25, just in case we do end up with that lower number, because we do want to make sure that we get the 8.75. Next steps would be the conference committee report. Hopefully once it gets released, it'll go to the legislature for a vote, probably sometime first or second week of July is my guess. And then of course it goes to the governor for her review. With the closing of FY24 approaching in 10 days, we revised our spending estimate downwards by $250,000. So it has now gone from about $8 million to $7.75 million. The latest treasurer's report is included in your packets, with a little more detail. This revision is due to our overestimation of the total cost of Tableau licenses. This is the data analytics tool that Enrique was referring to a little bit earlier. We also realized more savings in payroll due to 3 positions that will not be filled by the end of the fiscal year as we had originally predicted. However, so we're always predicting 48 FTEs by June 30th, but it looks like it will stay at 45. However, those 3 positions will undoubtedly be filled in the first quarter of FY25. Next slide, please. We do have 3 new additions to the commission. The legal division continues to excel with the onboarding of talented interns. Michael Brune and Noah Richardson will be interning for the division this summer. Both are currently studying at Boston University Law School. And the IT division has brought on Max Smith-Stern for the summer. He is studying computer science at Brown University. The recruitment efforts are still underway and ongoing for our DPS Deputy Director, Enforcement Counsel, and Paralegal. These positions, again, I had said before, are expected to be filled in the first quarter of FY25. Next slide, please. Finally, we wanted to provide you with an update as it's been 6 months since the last time we had reported on the Commission's diversity metrics. As you can see, we compared post metrics to the makeup of the state's population and the close to 45,000 state employees. A detailed memo was also included in your packets. You will note one difference from December's report is that we isolated post employees who are required to file an SFI, Statement of Financial Interest, as opposed to all the employees. So this way it gives you a better idea of the senior management team perspective. We will continue to regularly review these statistics and, of course, report back to the Commission.
I see there's a question from Commissioner Luma, maybe about.
Yeah, can you go back to that last slide, please? Yes, so I do have a question about this. So, you know, there's a different process as far as how commissioners come to the post and you know, versus employees. You know, we're by appointment, and then we didn't have to go through the hiring process in the same way that post-commission employees do. So I'm wondering, I know that these metrics include the post commission, but I'm wondering in regards to diversity, what it looks like if we kind of exclude the commissioners, and what those percentages are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think that tells us a little bit more information about kind of the impact of what the post commission's hiring practices are when it comes to diversity if we don't include appointees in those metrics.
Mhm. Yeah, we can do that, Commissioner Luma, going forward. It's fair to say that they will be different because they are included as part of this report. There's multiple ways in which we can try to reflect management or supervisory composition versus all employees. We'll think what might be the best way to make sure that that we can report something that is reflective of that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Let me stop sharing right now and see if there's any other comments or questions. Seeing none, that concludes our report, Chair Hinkle. You are muted, Madam Chair.
I'm either muted when I shouldn't be or not muted when I should be, and I apologize to everybody. Enrique and Eric, thank you very much, and thank the members of the staff who have worked so hard with you to provide us with the information that you've just done. So let me turn now, please, to the legal update and to our General Counsel, Randy Ravitz, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm going to introduce a new member of the Commission staff, Counsel Annie Lee. But many of you have known Annie Lee for a long time. She has been working with the Commission since its earliest days as an associate at the law firm of Anderson and Krieger, which she joined after graduating from the University of Chicago and Boston College Law School. And while at Anderson and Krieger and in her academic pursuits, Annie gained considerable experience in public sector law and many of the issues that the Commission confronts on a regular basis, and has been honored for her work in many ways. She has recently, as I said, moved from Anderson and Krieger to become part of the Commission staff, its legal team, and we're delighted to have her. And she has begun working on how the Commission could possibly implement or act on the need by statute to certify law enforcement agencies in addition to law enforcement officers. And she's going to give a presentation on how the Commission could possibly approach this. So I will turn the floor over to her.
Thank you very much, Randy, and good morning, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I have begun sharing my screen. Please let me know if you aren't seeing that on your screens. But today I'd like to discuss, as Randy mentioned, the project of agency certification. Over the past months, we've been researching agency certification programs in the Commonwealth and across the nation. We've been looking specifically at law enforcement certification programs, as well as agency-driven licensing in the Commonwealth. For example, the Department of Public Health and Hospitals, and the Department of Corrections and Correctional Facilities. And so today, based on what we've identified in our research, we're going to be walking the Commission through a framework that first outlines the different parts necessary for an agency certification program. Second, summarizes and incorporates high-level findings from other certification programs in the country. And lastly, it forecasts fundamental policy questions the Commission will have to answer as it develops a certification program. The goal today is to start the conversation about what certification looks like at a conceptual level and figure out what the Commission wants certification to mean and to look like before we put any requirements on the paper. As will become plainly obvious, this is going to be a very big project and it's going to take a lot of time. we're interested in working with agencies within their resources, as well as the commission's own resources, which means that the process is going to be incredibly important here, both in terms of design and implementation, which I'll speak to later. So in that spirit of process, we're going to be road mapping the various steps and discussions that the commission will be engaging in the coming months as it takes certification from concept to reality. But the goal today is to focus on the threshold question that sets the stage for the rest of agency certification, which is, what are the standards that agencies must meet? And we'll go into detail with that later. But again, I want to remind the commission, please don't get overwhelmed if there's too much going on. There's certainly a lot of information to review here. We're not asking for a vote today or to commit to any particular regulatory language, but really just to start the discussion about what certification in the Commonwealth will be. Given the breadth of agency certification here, the interest it's going to generate, as well as the impact it will have, we very much want this to be an inclusive process. To that end, we'll be asking all of you to engage in discussion, but of course, if any members of law enforcement or the public have any comments or feedback on agency certification as we discuss it today or in the coming months, we very much encourage them to submit those comments and that feedback to postccomments@mass.gov, which is the email address that has been used to receive comments throughout the commission's tenure. So with that, let's begin. Where does agency certification come from? It comes from statute. 6E Section 5, the commission's governing statute, requires the commission to certify all law enforcement agencies. And by all law enforcement agencies, the statute defines it as local police departments, state police agencies, sheriff's offices, university and college police departments, hospital police departments, and humane society police departments. I'll note for the commission here that this scope of agencies is narrower than the scope of officers that are required to be certified. For example, this scope of agencies does not include housing authorities or any organizations that employ constables. The statute also directs the commission to certify law enforcement agencies based on at least 8 topics. These 8 topics are use of force and reporting of use of force, officer code of conduct, officer response procedures, criminal investigation procedures, juvenile operations, internal affairs and officer complaint investigation procedures, detainee transportation, and lastly, collection and preservation of evidence. I want to note here that the legislature directs the commission to certify agencies in accordance with minimum standards that apply to all agencies. This indicates that the legislature's intent is for the commission to create flexible standards that work for all law enforcement agencies, whether that's state police to Boston Police Department to your smaller 3-person departments in the western part of the state. So based on this statutory mandate, how do we go from this requirement to certify all law enforcement agencies in accordance with at least these 8 standards to actually having a certification program in the state? And so I propose that the commission should consider developing a certification program along these lines, starting with design. What standards will the commission set? How will it define compliance? Essentially, what does certification mean? And then from there, turning to implementation. How will the commission measure compliance? And once agencies are past initial certification, how will agencies in the commission go about continuing certification? And while the intent is to create flexible standards that work for all agencies, how will the commission work with agencies that inevitably need relief from the commission's requirements? Will waivers be necessary? And then after certification is rolled out, how will the commission enforce its requirements against agencies that are not complying, both in terms of procedure and consequences? As I'll begin reviewing, each of these elements and each of these phases requires the commission to make fundamental policy decisions about what certification will look like. There's a lot that is unsaid about agency certification, and then there's a lot, which means that there's a lot of discretion for this commission to exercise with respect to agency certification. And so I want to first turn through some of the high-level findings that I mentioned earlier from other certification programs, both in the Commonwealth and throughout the nation, as well as some of the key policy questions that the commission will be considering as it designs a certification program. So starting with design and standards, and I'll return to this later, as I said, we're going to be focusing really on this first question today. Should the commission set standards in addition to the statutorily mandated 8? Be discussing that in greater detail. But other law enforcement agency certification programs in the country uniformly requires agencies to meet over 100 standards. Here, this legislature has only mandated 8 by statute. But in other states, there are over 100 standards. They generally address administration, personnel, training, and operations. So the first question for the commission will be, should the commission set standards to create a comprehensive agency certification program that goes beyond just the 8 listed in statute? And again, we'll be returning to that later today. And so assuming the commission does set standards beyond just the 8, should the commission certification program have tiers where the commission requires at a minimum agencies to meet certain standards, but then allows agencies to achieve higher tiers of certification based on their ability to meet additional optional standards? Or should all standards be mandatory? There's no one way to do this. In our research, we saw that non-governmental certification programs like those run by CALEA, which is the Commission on Accreditation of Law Enforcement Agencies. It's an international agency certification program. And as well as MPAC, which is the Massachusetts Police Accreditation Commission. They currently run the project of accreditation and certification in the Commonwealth. They have tiered programs where that means that agencies have to meet at least a minimum number of requirements, but then agencies can go above those and achieve higher levels of accreditation or certification by meeting more requirements. In contrast, governmental certification programs like those run by the post commissions or the equivalents in Delaware, New Hampshire, New York, Ohio, Virginia, North Carolina, all of their standards are presumptively mandatory. There are also programs somewhat in the middle. Connecticut is one example. It has a tiered program for the purposes of initial certification that aims to walk agencies through certification by subject. So in year 1, they achieve tier 1 certification, which means that they've addressed certain standards. In year 2, they achieve tier 2, which means additional standards. Year 3 is tier 3, which are an extra set of standards. And the idea is by the end of year 3, all agencies have met tier 3 standards and have met a comprehensive set of standards. And we also even see this in the Commonwealth, this kind of hybrid of mandatory as well as optional, but not this tiered program. I'm thinking specifically of the Department of Corrections. They designate some standards as required and some as recommended when it comes to correctional facilities. So if the commission does seek to create a comprehensive agency certification program, the commission will need to decide how much flexibility agencies have to participate in the program. Is there only one level of participation, or are there multiple levels of participation? I apologize for that siren. Hopefully that passes soon. All right. And so once the commission defines or sets the standards, the next question for the commission then is, how does it define compliance? Is it just by implementing policies that meet the commission standards? Or can the commission, or should the commission also take into consideration an agency's past compliance with other laws, rules, and regulations? As Enrique mentioned, there's a bit of a variety of sort of participation by agencies with the commission's programs. And so that sort of indicates a variety of different understandings about the commission's role and authority and agencies' relationships with the commission. I think certification here presents an opportunity for the commission to clear up any confusion or misunderstandings about the commission's role and authority, and to remind agencies of their ongoing obligations to comply with all other laws, rules, and regulations, including those set by the commission, as well as the Municipal Police Training Commission. And so from there, the question of, once you've defined compliance, becomes, how do you measure compliance? I think based on what I've identified from my research from other agency certification programs, what I've learned is that it's key to measure compliance by conducting independent assessments rather than relying on an agency's self-representation that it is in compliance. The assessment process in other states generally begins with a paper review of agency files, policies, and proofs of compliance. I'll note that this is the same sort of way that MPAC, the Massachusetts Accreditation and Certification Nonprofit, goes about starting the compliance process here. So they do this paper review first, and then once they're satisfied with the paper review, they send assessors in person to the agency to observe operations, tour facilities, interview staff, and in some cases, hold public comment sessions with members of the community to hear about what's going well and what can be improved. Based on what the assessor learns from both their paper review as well as their on-site review, the assessor then creates a written report of their findings and conclusions and makes a recommendation on whether or not the agency should be certified. There's a little bit of variation here, but generally speaking, the assessor is not the one making the final certification decision. The report goes up to the governing body. For example, with CALEA or MPAC, it would go up to the commission. For other states with post commissions, it might go up to the full post commission, much as in a public meeting like we would have today. And that governing body then reviews the assessor's report and recommendations. And in the case of public bodies, publicly votes on whether to certify the agency. And so that itself raises a lot of questions for the commission, just understanding how it's going to go about doing independent assessments versus just relying on agency self-reporting. The first question is really, what is the commission's role in this assessment process? Should the commission be making the ultimate certification decision, or should the commission delegate that decision to the executive director or the director of police certification? There are over 400 agencies in the Commonwealth. This is a very daunting task, regardless of who takes it up. And if the commission doesn't want to delegate the certification decision and would like to take it up, how will it do so? Will it review the assessor's report during a public meeting and make a decision based on that report? Or will it also create the opportunity to hear from the agency and the assessor themselves and ask them questions if there is anything that comes up either during presentation or in the assessor's report? And then there's also a question of when to do this. Should agencies be assessed on a rolling basis, where when they have a policy that meets a standard, they submit it to the commission for review, and so they can essentially manage the workflow? Or should agencies only be assessed after they've implemented all the policies necessary to meet all of the commission's standards? That can be helpful from an efficiency standpoint. You're only reviewing an agency once, but at the same time, it can create significant management concerns in terms of workflow. And also, when we talk about what it means to define compliance, how do we also measure that in terms of what is required for certification? Do all policies that an agency have need to be compliant, or is the commission willing to certify agencies where the majority of policies are compliant? So is it 100% or nothing, or is it at least 50%, and then we'll figure out what to do after that 50%? And when I say we'll figure out what to do, does that mean the commission fully certifies the agency, conditionally or provisionally certifies them, or even puts those agencies on probation? What will the commission require agencies to do with those non-compliant policies? Are they allowed to remain, or does the commission require the agencies to bring those remaining policies into compliance? And lastly, how long is the certification period? Other jurisdictions generally set a certification period of 3 to 5 years. I'll note that in the Commonwealth, where there are agencies that are accredited and certified by CALEA, CALEA certification is good for 4 years, and MPAC certification is good for 3 years. But I think what's sort of uniform here is that certification is not a one and done process. It's ongoing. Compliance needs to be met at all times, and the commission needs to periodically reassess agencies to determine their ongoing compliance. And so that also tees up questions here in sort of the ongoing phases. What, if anything, should look different from initial compliance and initial assessment? What can and should agencies in the commission do between certification periods? for the agency side, what can they do with compliant policies? Can they change them? Can they amend them? Or do they have to wait for the next assessment? For the commission, how can it exercise its oversight abilities to ensure that agencies are maintaining their compliance instead of just achieving compliance right before assessment begins? And so, as I previously noted, although the direction from the legislature is to create flexible standards that work for all agencies, it'll be important, especially as agency certification is first rolling out, to work with agencies and meet them where they're at, particularly where there are extenuating circumstances. And so I've previously mentioned that many agencies in the Commonwealth are already accredited or certified through nonprofit organizations. And so one of the first questions I think about is, how do we work with those agencies that have already participated in those programs? There are currently a total of 262 agencies that are engaged with CALEA and MPAC. That's over half of agencies that would fall within the scope of the Commission's agency certification mandate. Of those 262 agencies, 137 have already achieved accreditation or certification. I'll break down the numbers here for you. 120 agencies here are in self-assessment with MPAC, which means that they haven't yet sought certification, but they have represented to MPAC that they are in the process or will intend to later seek certification. And so of those numbers, of the 137 that are already accredited or certified, most are through MPAC, which is the Massachusetts accrediting nonprofit. There are a small number, I believe approximately 10, that are certified through the national nonprofit CALEA. And so when the commission considers these agencies that are very engaged with CALEA or MPAC, whether that's through self-assessment or actually achieving certification, the commission's going to need to determine whether it's willing to accept those agencies' participations in those programs. And if so, what does it mean to accept it? Is it accepting MPAC or CALEA accreditation certification as a valid alternative to the commission certification program? And also, as I mentioned, CALEA and MPAC have tiered programs. So is there a difference between an agency that achieves CALEA Tier 1 versus Tier 2 certification, or an agency that has MPAC certification versus accreditation? Does the commission treat those any differently as it considers whether to accept those certifications or accreditations as a valid alternative? So is the commission willing to accept those representations as entirely a valid alternative, or does the commission want to be more precise and compare what MPAC and CALEA are doing with what the commission does with its standards and grant relief? Is it standard by standard where CALEA and MPAC standards align with the commission's? Or again, is it just if you have CALEA or MPAC certification, we'll take it on good faith that you meet all of the commission standards? And then another implementation consideration I also think about is whether the commission should grant automatic waivers for the purposes of initial implementation. This is the third question that's on your screen right now. As I learned from my research, achieving initial certification through other organizations typically takes anywhere from 1.5 years to 3 years. And that can be because there's a lack of resources and they have to train someone in what it means to write policies that meet standards. Sometimes it's also a question of monetary resources. Some of CALEA and MPAC standards require agencies to have certain facilities in a certain condition or to have certain equipment. And so that can take time to sort of requisition those funds and procure those materials. And so, you know, with that in mind, we understand that certification is a large project, right? If it was easy, you could turn it around tomorrow, but it's clearly not if it takes 1.5 to 3 years, especially with a comprehensive program that requires a very careful, detailed review of all policies and practice that an agency is engaging in. And so we don't want to make agencies fearful of certification, and we don't want them to panic. So how can we work with them to achieve certification in a realistic but timely and efficient manner? would it be prudent to work with agencies to create an implementation plan that essentially identifies how much work an agency has to do to achieve certification, what those steps are, and when agencies will take those steps in order to come into compliance? And of course, if the commission does entertain an automatic waiver for implementation, how long is that waiver? Like I said, the process is anywhere from usually 1.5 years to 3 years. Does the commission want to set 1-year waivers and then sort of consider renewals year by year, or does it want to go as far as setting a 3-year waiver? What if an agency needs to renew or extend its implementation waiver, perhaps beyond just 1 year or even 3 years? Is there a process that the agency, that the commission would like to set for agencies to meet them in those circumstances? And even beyond implementation, there are inevitably going to be agencies that seek relief from particular standards due to extenuating circumstances, like if they simply don't perform a function that a standard is aimed at. One example being court services. There's not always a courthouse in a particular town or nearby. So if there isn't one, then the agency doesn't need to perform court services. That's a standard that would be inapplicable. Or agencies may need to seek relief if compliance poses a hardship in a way that doesn't jeopardize the health, safety, and welfare of the public. How can the commission work with those agencies? And so that's another aspect in which waivers will be important for the commission to consider. And then from there, once certification is rolled out, once sort of implementation has been tackled, what should the commission do to enforce its requirements? The hope and expectation is that agencies will comply and achieve certification. But what happens if that is not the case? How does the commission go about enforcing its requirements? And I think it's helpful here to break down enforcement into 2 pieces, as I foreshadowed: procedures and consequences. Starting with procedures, agencies don't have a traditional due process right to certification in the same way that officers do, but licensing agencies in the Commonwealth, like the Gaming Commission, the Department of Corrections, Department of Public Health, Department of Public Utilities, they employ an adjudicatory process that looks a lot like the adjudicatory process the commission has for officers. Does the commission want to employ the same process that they use for officers with respect to agencies? Is it a matter of expanding the scope of the adjudicatory process regulation to include agencies? Or does a separate enforcement regulation pertaining to agencies, is that more appropriate in this scenario? And then the other side of enforcement, as I mentioned, is sanctions. What are the consequences if an agency is found in non-compliance? Licensing agencies in the Commonwealth employ a range of sanctions, including warnings, reprimands, censure, probation, suspension, revocation, consent agreements, and receivership. This is not to suggest that the commission should be limited or prevented from using the tools already available to it, like assessing penalties, but this is hopefully helping the commission, giving you some examples about what it could potentially subject agencies to, particularly in the most extreme circumstances. And I think that itself is worth considering. What will the agency do if an agency engages in extremely dangerous conduct that jeopardizes the health, safety, and welfare of the public? So, for example, if an agency refuses to have a use of force policy, which is that meets the agency standards. And again, I'll note here that use of force is a statutorily mandated standard that agencies have to meet in order to achieve certification. And so we heard from a colleague in New York that their post equivalent can, and in fact has done so, they've gone as far as shutting down a failing agency and had the county sheriff step in. I'm not suggesting that this is what the commission should do. And again, we're not asking the commission to commit to sort of what is the most serious consequence that agency could face here. But the commission should consider what it means or what it would do with an agency in the worst case scenario, whether that's having someone from the commission, from certification or standards, go to the agency and oversee its day-to-day operations, holding the chief responsible, or even like New York, shutting down the agency and asking either special state police officers or the county sheriff, or even nearby municipalities to step in and serve in the interim. But again, there's a lot to consider here, and this is a process. As I've sort of hinted at, there are a lot of things sort of flow from decisions that you'll initially make. And so a lot of the policy questions that I've posed here, some are going to be taken off the table depending on the decisions the commission makes early on, or what it does with some of these initial policy questions. And so for today, like I said, I would like to focus the commission on the policy questions surrounding standards. What are the standards for agencies to meet in order to achieve certification? And specifically, should the commission set standards beyond the 8 already required by statute? And so as I reviewed earlier, other states and other certification programs generally require agencies to meet over 100 standards. Nonprofit organizations like CALEA and MPAC require agencies to meet at a minimum 180 standards. And then when the agency pursues the highest level of accreditation or certification, again, because these organizations run tiered programs, they're meeting at a maximum of 461 standards. Again, you know, if CALEA or MPAC changes their standards, the number could very well increase or decrease, but there's a large range here of 180 to 461 when it comes to CALEA and MPAC, which are currently certifying and accrediting agencies in the Commonwealth. Other states that have certification programs through their post agencies or equivalent require less, but still far more than 8. Delaware, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, and Ohio require agencies to meet somewhere from 110 to 116 standards, while Virginia requires agencies to meet 190 standards. So again, there's a lot of variation, but we're seeing a lot more than 8. And topically, standards generally address administration, which means the general management, mission, goals, organizational structure, delineation of responsibility, and delegation of authority. Administration essentially just means components of the agency that do not deliver law enforcement services to the community, but affect how the agency itself as an organization runs. Standards also address personnel, which means hiring, career opportunities, the work environment, and discipline. Standards also address training, from basic training to in-service, as well as specialized training. I'll take the opportunity here to note that in the Commonwealth, we have the benefit of the Municipal Police Training Commission, which governs the substance of training. So our role is likely going to be more limited to enforcing training requirements rather than mandating a training curriculum look a certain kind of way. And lastly, standards address operations, which means the direct services that agencies provide to the public. So when you traditionally think of law enforcement, you think of patrol, traffic, criminal investigations. That is what operations standards are aimed at addressing. And so, you know, this really, I think, will sort of tee up the discussion for the commission, which is, should the commission go beyond the 8 that are required by statute? I want to sort of take a step back and look at what these 8 standards are within the commission's general mandate and statute. And so when we consider these 8 standards in the larger context of statute and the legislature's goals for the commission, I think it's clear that these 8 statutory requirements are not an exhaustive or complete list. The legislature demonstrated that its priorities for the commission and for law enforcement in the Commonwealth includes racial justice. It banned racial profiling. Its priorities also include training, as it created new forms of training, hiring through the imposition of law enforcement officer certification standards, as well as professional development through its prescription and procedures concerning officer promotions and discipline. So I think it's, when you consider the priorities of 6E as well as this list, I think it's clear that there are some things that the legislature didn't include that, you know, in spirit, it would very much like the commission to address. So I would therefore recommend the commission promulgate additional standards, particularly those that address personnel and operations, like those listed on the slide, to further align agency certification with the spirit of the commission's governing statute, consistent with the commission's mission. The other common certification topics I've listed for you is not an exhaustive list. This isn't close to 100 standards, certainly nowhere close to 461 standards, but these are examples of standards that the commission could set in addition to the 8 that I believe are consistent with 6E as well as the commission statute. One thing that I'll also note here is that it's incredibly helpful and I think incredibly commendable that so many agencies in the Commonwealth are already participating in CALEA and MPAC's accreditation and certification programs, where they're asked to meet at least 130 more standards than our statute requires. So based on that work, it seems like it would be a relatively or comparatively small lift for agencies to meet standards in addition to these 8, where a lot of agencies are already meeting 138 standards. The commission here has the opportunity to leverage that work to create a comprehensive first-class agency certification program. And a lot of that is due, of course, in part to CALEA and MPAC's great work in the Commonwealth. So with that, I invite the commission to discuss whether it's appropriate to go beyond the statutorily mandated 8, as well as to ask any questions I'm happy to answer. I see Commissioner Kazarosian, a wave of a hand.
Well, I just wanted to first thank you for this. This was really high level and there's an awful lot to digest, and I know it'll take some time to do it, but I think this sounds like something we need to look at, from my perspective anyway, in steps, and then what would we do as a first step and a second step, how we would approach it. But this was excellent presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I see that Commissioner Luma raised her hand, and then Commissioner Baker.
Yes. Oh, go ahead, Chair Henkel.
I just wondered whether you could stop the screen sharing at this point. I understand. I mean, I think it would be useful if we could all. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Apologize for interrupting you, Charlene.
Yes, thank you for this. So I agree that we do have to take a look at this as far as considering some additional standards. I do have a questions for Commissioner Baker and Calderon, because one of the things that stands out to me is a standard around just officer wellness, particularly when it comes to mental health. And so I'm wondering what it looks like right now in your agencies, and is it common practice for other law enforcement agencies to have specific standards around addressing officer wellness and mental health, particularly in the aftermath of an incident that may be serious that they were involved in?
Would you like me to go first?
Sure, thank you.
So with regards to mental health, yes, that's a priority, obviously, for every police department, but everybody's policies are different. The Framingham Police Department personally is part of MPAC. We have one of the highest levels that you can achieve with accreditation. So I firmly believe in this. So everybody's different. They look different, different accreditations. Even those that aren't accredited may have some type of form. I'll wait till my question goes along, but a lot of that depends on funding. We do immediately after an incident, we bring the entire, shift or all those involved together. We do different things with physical fitness, allowing people to come off the street, sending people out, but not every police department has the same funding. And I can touch a little bit more on this when it comes back to me, but that is obviously a priority. And if you are going to set that standard, and I've said this before, keep in mind when you set these standards, you need to set them that they can be funded from the largest police department to the smallest police department, and the funding doesn't go away within 1 year. I know this commission has talked a lot of great things about what they want to do for officers, and as an officer, I truly appreciate it. But it's no good to us if you fund it for 1 year or mandate it, and then it just falls off because no one can achieve it or pay for it.
Thank you for that, Commissioner Baker. That reminds me that when I say standards, we're not prescribing, model policies or exact policy language that agencies have to use. Standards generally address sort of topics. So it tells you what the agency needs to address, but not how. the idea of focusing on the what and not how is to make sure that these standards are flexible so agencies can tailor them for their circumstances, such as funding. All right, I think after Commissioner Baker, I think I saw Commissioner Talley and then Commissioner Kazarosian, Commissioner Hinkle, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I also just had a statement more than a question. So like I said, we are an accredited agency. This is something that I think we need to really take our time with. I'm not running away from it. I think it's a good thing. But you have to understand, like I just said, that not every agency is the same. Some of these mandates that you institute with accreditation are just simply policies. Other things that you have to institute, depending on what level you're gonna have to take to it, I recently had to make modifications to my CAD system to achieve a higher level of accreditation. Now that caused me to go into my budget with something I wasn't expecting. I've had to change out equipment. I had to change out layouts of the building. Not every agency is the same. And I'm gonna get a little sarcastic here. We talked about holding police chiefs and framing in police departments accountable. Are we gonna hold city and town officials accountable for not letting us meet those requirements in funding? So I think we gotta walk a fine line here. What can everybody achieve within their budgets? I think we can totally get here, but we have to keep all these things in mind, that not every agency is the same. And we're gonna have to be able to do this across the board.
Thank you, Commissioner Baker. I think Commissioner Talley, right, Annie had his hand up next.
Yes, I believe so.
Well, I think it's good overall, and as I think it was kind of alluded to earlier, to do it in parts. I'm just piggybacking that idea that it should be done in phases, so you can make course corrections while we're implementing this. That's just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Talley. When you say sort of doing it in phases, are you sort of thinking of the Connecticut example where certain subjects are required by year 1, other subjects by year 2, and then the final set of subjects by year 3? Are you, I'm just trying to understand sort of what it is in phases. Are you thinking a little bit more of the waivers approach where, you know, we set sort of all of the requirements up front in statute so agencies know what they have to do, but then we work with them on the implementation side to make sure that they can do it sort of in this gradual kind of process?
Well, I'm not saying that we have to exactly do it as Connecticut did it, but maybe let them know this is everything up front. And by this time frame, we're expecting this to be accomplished. By this time frame, we expect you to have this in place, something similar to that.
Okay, gotcha.
And I think Commissioner Calderon was next. And then Commissioner Kazarosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And again, I apologize. I'm on the screen. I'm almost done on the vehicle. I think the chief said it best. When we're talking about the department's inner workings, the best person to talk to is the chief, or in Boston's sense, the commissioner. Really, the leaders of the organizations would be the appropriate people to give input on how best to assess departments and talk about the requirements moving forward. And as Commissioner Tully just said, maybe doing it in increments is the best way to do it, because if we saddle organizations small to large with everything that's expected or that the commission puts forward, it makes it so much more difficult for smaller agencies to adhere to it, or maybe larger agencies to adhere to it. So I think that moving forward, we're going to have to contact the leaders of the police departments across the Commonwealth to get their input, just how best to make this work. So I'm going to refer to the chief. I back what he said. I think that that's probably a way to start this conversation off.
Absolutely. And Commissioner Calderoni, as I sort of said at the beginning, we very much value the input and the feedback from the community when it comes to agency certification, particularly the chiefs. And so because of that, we're encouraging members of law enforcement as well as the public to submit their comments and their input to post C comments, but as well as to request meetings. And so I think that now that we've sort of kicked off this discussion in front of the commission, we're certainly, and I can sort of speak for myself, I'm certainly open to sort of speaking with anyone from any organization who would like to sort of provide their feedback, as well as the Chiefs of Police Association. I know that in other states, chiefs of police are often the ones who are running these accreditation programs. I believe that MPAC is itself, I think, primarily staffed by leadership from law enforcement throughout the Commonwealth. And so we certainly welcome their engagement and their feedback and suggestions throughout this process.
Thanks, Annie. I appreciate that. And I should have said, welcome back and welcome on your full position here. And nice to see you again. If I could just add in close, and maybe the commission or someone within the staff, however the executive director chooses, maybe we should generate a letter to all of the agency's heads to make sure that they are aware that we're asking for input. As much as I know that the chief is on here with me, and there are others in the audience, a lot of times with all the communities throughout the Commonwealth, chiefs don't know that they're being asked for their input. So maybe a letter generated by the commission sent out to all of the heads of the departments is a good idea as well.
Absolutely. That's certainly something we can consider. We can also consider sending that letter to MPAC, to the Chiefs of Police Associations, the sheriff's organizations, other parties that we know will be interested in this, such as the Attorney General's office, the Governor's office, as well as the civil rights organizations in the Commonwealth, such as the ACLU or Lawyers for Civil Rights.
Commissioner Kazarosian.
Thank you. I mean, what we're proposing here and how to reach out to everyone, I support fully, and I think it's very important to do that. My concern is that when we talk about funding, that people have the right expectations. Our mandate doesn't include dealing with funding. So even though we have to have it, certainly, Commissioner Baker, in the back of our minds when we address this, it cannot be something that drives our decision from my understanding of what we do and what we have an obligation to do and what we're authorized to do. That's not something that can drive our decisions. We have to make the determinations. Unfortunately, funding is something completely out of our hands and not something that we have any control over or authority over.
Thank you. And Commissioner Baker, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to that. I agree with you, Commissioner, that's not the message I'm trying to get across. This commission has a job to do, and it doesn't require funding. I am speaking as, sitting in this chair as a chief. We are also in a position where we are going to put this out, but those are things that we should take into consideration. When I say that, what I'm trying to say is, if you're talking about things where part of these accreditation standards may require you to change things in your building, change things to your software. Those are just things we have to keep in mind. But if we do set a standard where you might have to make some changes that it is financially, I think it's also this commission's job to then be an advocate for those chiefs, for those agencies, for those communities, for someone's going to have to fund that. But I agree with you. Those decisions shouldn't affect our decisions, but we have to keep that in mind when we do move forward.
Thank you. If I may make a couple of comments, I certainly echo the questions that have been raised thus far, and I want to thank you, Annie, for the extraordinarily comprehensive analysis that you've done and presented to us today. I must say that I have serious reservations about our taking on this massive task at the very same time that we were doing a lot of other things. And I recognize that what the statute requires. But I guess my first question to you, Annie, is, are there other states where the post commission have addressed mandatory law enforcement certification? Are there any other states where the post commissions have done that as opposed to other entities?
Right. So I think that's something, I'm glad you asked that question, because that is a distinction worth highlighting here. other states, other post organizations such as Delaware, New Hampshire, New York, North Carolina, Virginia, that's not an exhaustive list. I listed them earlier. Their post commissions do agency certification. But what is different for the Commonwealth is that, as far as I can identify, the Commonwealth will be engaging in the first mandatory certification program in the nation. There's a slight sort of carve out when I say that all other programs are totally voluntary. New York requires agencies to essentially meet two standards. And that those standards are related to hiring as well as to reporting. And so all agencies in New York have been able to meet those two standards, but that is the only example of mandatory standards that I've seen in the nation. I believe that the statute's directive for this post commission to establish mandatory certification is a first of its kind in the nation.
Commissioner Calderon?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to say that I agree with your initial statement with all of the things that this commission has been tasked with taking on. As much as I appreciate being able to brag that the Commonwealth would be the first in the nation to do things, maybe this isn't the appropriate time to take on such a large task. Maybe this is something we continue talking about, but don't aggressively strike the chord right now. Again, I agree with the chief and Masha, and Commissioner Kazarosian on both sides of the coin. On one hand, I know it's not our job to worry about fiscal impact, so to say, but the chief is absolutely correct. We should be thinking about that. So such a large undertaking at this time, maybe it's something we continue to talk about, but don't aggressively try to attack just to be the first in the nation or to follow New York, so to speak. But whatever I can do to be helpful, count on me to do so.
Other questions or comments? Yes, Enrique.
I'll just mention something that Annie alluded to and has been on my mind since we first started thinking about the process or the prospect of agency certification, because the statute in its language really implies a quite broad, wide range of possibilities that we could go with. And in my view, it's all about incrementalism. If we took 1, 2, however many of the 8 that are specifically stated in the statute, and go along with the spirit of the statute, I can think of use of force and agency investigations, for example, that relate very much directly into what we're trying to do as we speak in the historical disciplinary records and the database. That would be, in my view, a really good approach in which we can roll out standards at different times with some planned schedule, if you will, or some broader plan to begin on the journey of agency certification. I think what Annie very well did here was to paint the really broad horizon that we have here, but it doesn't mean that we have to tackle it all at once, as she mentioned. It could also be done on a rolling basis.
Is there any commissioner who disagrees with the idea that Enrique has just expressed and others have alluded to, of doing it incrementally? Anybody disagree with that approach? Don't think I see anybody doing that. So Annie, have we given you, I think, enough guidance at this point?
I think I have guidance, but at the same time, I heard sort of from at least Commissioner Luma, and I think Commissioner Kazarosian and some others, that we should be going beyond the 8. And so, while I'm happy to sort of come up with a plan that sort of, I guess, requires agencies to come into compliance with the 8th standard sort of piece by piece, do we want to also at the same time be thinking about what are the standards beyond the 8 required by statute that the commission would also like to see met, such as bias-free policing, workplace code of conduct, to Commissioner Luma's point, officer wellness and mental health. So I want to make sure I'm not losing sight of the larger picture while also working on Enrique's suggestion of sort of doing it incrementally, or doing the 8 incrementally.
But could we end up making that decision after we have solicited from the public, specifically from chiefs and others with a particular interest, their views on that issue? Could we hold off until make a decision until then?
Yeah, we could.
Commissioner Keserosian?
Thank you. Just so for clarification, are we saying then that this incremental approach will include that we start with the 8 statutory bullet points, and then at the same time keep the bigger picture in mind going forward, but solicit comments and input on the first 8 matters in the statute? Is that how we're sort of envisioning this?
Well, my point about incrementalism was, you know, in the abstract, if you will, it could be the 8, it could be a subset of the 8, it could be more than the 8. I suppose all of it will benefit from what's been alluded to already, which is the consultation that we envision will happen with different groups, notably the mass chiefs and others, you know, MPAC, etc. So the big idea about presenting this for the first time for this type of discussion, commissioners, was to lay out, I guess, the enormity of the task, and I think that's clear from the comments. And in my mind, that leaves us always with, you know, what can we then take that is incremental.
But I mean, and I agree, and I know we have a lot on our plate going forward, but I know also that this is going to take a lot of time. So I'm just thinking, my thought process was, you know, if we're going to start with something, we start focused on one section, and then maybe the first 8, and then work on the others, so we can at least chip away while we have some with the time that we have.
That's clearly a possibility. Yep.
Commissioner Hall?
Thank you, Chair. So along with Commissioner Calderon, I am in favor really of taking incremental steps, but also addressing any other kind of standards we want to discuss. I think we can do that simultaneously, right? And I think it's important that we do move forward, while it may seem overwhelming, and it is, and a lot for the commission to do. I think we need to do it. And so I would love to move forward with that, incremental steps, but let's start discussing other standards we may be interested in, and we can just add them to the list. I don't think it makes a difference, but move forward, I think we must.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate it. I'd like to go back to agreeing with Commissioner Keserosian. The 8 requirements, I really strongly believe that that's where we should start it. And I don't think it takes a motion, but I'd like to put a recommendation out there for consideration that maybe we come back to it in the subsequent public meetings. Doesn't have to be next month, but maybe 2 months from now, and allow 6 to 8 weeks of the summer for chiefs and outside organizations to weigh in with their wants or questions or concerns, and then come back and start discussing the 8, because I think this is a huge undertaking, and we definitely need to give some time for organizations to deal with their inner workings of the departments and their leadership team and get their ideas to this body, so that we can be able to debate it on a very highly educated level. And I think in small increments, starting with the 8 is the way to go. So I'm agreeing with Commissioner Keserosian and suggesting that maybe we do that over the next several weeks.
Thank you. Enrique?
And thank you, Madam Chair. Just one comment relative to achieving, the broad task. This was mentioned, but I'll mention it again. And it's actually one of the questions, and I'll just mention, we don't really take questions in these settings. But the MPAC, the Mass Police Accreditation Commission, as well as CALIA, in my view, could really act as force multipliers based on however we decide to set out standards and regulations. It's conceivable to think that they could not just provide feedback in upfront as part of this process, but then react positively by implementing standards, let's say, or prioritizing them if this commission decided that, we were going to focus on some before others. So I do believe, I do think, by the way, that for next fiscal year, we will be asking more money of the legislature to put in some resources in our agency to help us with this undertaking. But it's also conceivable that that we could use and leverage a lot of the existing resources.
So where does this leave us in terms of direction to Annie and the others working with her? Annie, do you feel you have enough direction to move forward at this point?
Yes, as I understand it, the direction is to sort of start with the 8. So what I can start doing is sort of pulling together some proposed language for the 8 standards. I would probably not be bringing them to you for a vote whenever they're ready, because we haven't quite figured it out, or we haven't had the discussion yet about measuring compliance and assessing the assessment process and things like that yet. So what I can start doing is sort of drafting the standards for this commission's review, so we can all understand what standards will look like going forward, while at the same time also working with Enrique and Randy to get a letter out to the chiefs of police and all throughout the Commonwealth, as well as various organizations like MPAC, the Attorney General's Office, Lawyers for Civil Rights, to get their feedback about what standards they think would be feasible and would be useful to add in addition to the 8.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from my fellow commissioners? If not, once more, Annie, just thank you for the extraordinarily analytical analysis and your presentation today. And thanks to all of the commissioners for the expressions of views that you made. I think, Annie, you have indicated to the public more than once, and perhaps you want to do it again, how they can let us know their views.
Yes, if there are any comments or suggestions, feedback, the email address is postc-comments@mass.gov. The public is welcome to submit their comments and feedback there, as well as to request a meeting if they have, if they feel that would be beneficial.
Thank you. And going back to our agenda, I think we are now on item number 5, matters not anticipated by the chair at the time of posting. There are none. And I will at this time entertain a motion to go into executive session in accordance with Chapter 38, Sections 21A1 of the general laws, anticipating discussion regarding the discipline or dismissal of complaints or charges brought against a public officer, employer, or an individual. Section 21A5 of that same statute, in anticipation of discussion regarding the investigation of charges of criminal misconduct, and sections 21A7 combined with Chapter 60, Section 8C2, and to the extent they may be applicable, Chapter 6, Sections 168 and 178, in anticipation of discussion regarding the initiation of preliminary inquiries and initial staff review related to the same, and then also in anticipation of discussion or approval of our minutes of prior executive session. We are talking about, and our agenda lists this, considering reports of preliminary inquiry in 5 matters, considering approval to enter into a voluntary decertification agreement in 1 matter, request for approval to conduct a preliminary inquiry and a suspension in 1 matter, and approval to conduct preliminary inquiries in 6 matters. So I think with that, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
For a second.
Second.
Thank you. Commissioner Baker? Do you approve?
Approved.
Thank you. Commissioner Calderon?
I approve.
Commissioner Hall?
Approved.
Commissioner Catarosian, you made the motion. Commissioner Luma?
Approved.
Commissioner Talley?
Approve.
I also approve, so that is unanimous. We will take a 10-minute break before we go into executive session. And I think there is contact information which is separate from this. Members of the public, thank you for your interest and your attendance today. We will not be coming back to the public meeting after our executive session. Thank you. We are now adjourned.